Good for trouble.
Good evening. Welcome to the July 17th, 2013 meeting of the City of Lake Forest Plan Commission. I am Michael Lay. I'm chairman of the commission. At this time, I'd like to introduce my colleagues, the members of the commission. To my far right is Guy Berg. Next to him is Commissioner Culbertson. To my far left, Commissioner Kuchman, then Commissioner Carris, and Commissioner Ziccarelli. From city staff this evening, we have Ms. Zerniak, and I'd like to get right to our agenda this evening. Our first item of business is approval of minutes from both the May 8th, 2013 meeting of the commission and some summary minutes of the June 25th commission work session. Are there any corrections, requests for clarification, amendments, deletions to any of the minutes? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve both sets of minutes?
So moved.
Been moved, second?
Second.
Second, all those in favor of approval of the minutes indicate by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. Minutes are approved. The next item on our agenda is item number 3, public hearing and action on consideration of minor modifications to the previously approved subdivision plat for Willow Lake subdivision. No change in density or layout is proposed. The Willow Lake subdivision is located off of Field Drive behind the Brunswick office building. At this point, I would ask if there are any declarations of conflict of interest or ex parte contacts by any members of the commission on this item before us. Seeing none, we can proceed. Presentation by the petitioner. Kathy, did you want to make a comment on
Yes, this is.
how we should proceed?
This item is really a formality, so if you are comfortable, we would suggest that you not hear a presentation. There is no change in this development to the density, to the configuration. to the type of units. What is changing with the new developer stepping in is there is a very slight shift in a number of property lines. In most cases, it's very, very minor, simply to better align their new product type with the street to allow those products to fit better on the lot. There is one more significant change right at the entrance. In early discussions with the petitioner, they pointed out that a number of ash trees in a tree preservation area that pushed the first lot toward the entrance road had died. So it made a whole lot of sense and really improved the project to reduce the extent of that tree preservation area because the ash trees are coming out anyway, and pull that first duplex a bit away from the entrance road. That entrance will then be better landscaped. So this is just a minor shift to the subdivision plat, but it does require that a new plat be recorded. So if you're comfortable, we would recommend that you move forward with a recommendation to the City Council in support of the minor amendment to the plat.
Okay. Can I get confirmation from the petitioner that that's acceptable to proceed in that manner? Is that okay? Yes. All right, very good. Thank you very much. Any further comments that you have, Kathy, on this?
I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Are there any questions of Kathy or of the petitioner? Seeing none, what's the pleasure of the commission? The item before us is to approve the staff recommendations as outlined in the staff report and recommendations. Could I have a motion?
Yes, do you want to structure a motion that we can adopt as our own?
Yes, a motion might be recommend approval of the amendments to the plat as proposed.
So moved.
Seconded.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion by the commission? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. The next item on our agenda is item number 4, a public hearing and action on consideration of a request for approval of Phase 2 of the master plan for Woodlands Academy, located at 760 East Wesley Road. The owner is Woodlands Academy of the Sacred Heart. Our representative here this evening is Ralph Elwert, trustee. Good evening.
Good evening, thank you. I am a trustee at Woodlands Academy, and I'm also a resident of Ward 2. With me tonight is Debbie Haddad, also a counsel for Woodlands Academy, along with Mike Black, our civil engineer. There are some new members on the Planning Commission since the last time we were before you, but I know that you are generally familiar with Woodlands Academy. We're here to seek approval of Phase 2 of our master plan for Woodlands Academy. Now let me begin with a very short visual history of the campus. The property was purchased by the Religious of the Sacred Heart in the early 1900s. 1904, construction of Old Main was complete, and the Academy of the Sacred Heart was moved from Taylor Street in Chicago to its new home. The Academy of the Sacred Heart is the original name of Woodlands Academy. Berg College was subsequently established in 1918 and initially occupied the southern wing of Old Main, while the Academy of the Sacred Heart occupied the northern wing. The Academy became a separate institution, moved across the ravine, and was renamed Woodlands Academy in the 1960s. Moving forward, pictured here is Berg College as it was in 2002. Now the balance of the slides will be drawings, and here we've converted the overhead photo to a drawing so we can use this as the base moving forward. Now let's fast forward to last fall, October of 2012. Pictured here is the campus with existing roadways and Old Main as of last October. The Plan Commission and City Council had hearings and approved as Phase 1 a site for a cell tower and a temporary access road effective October 15 of 2012. Then on December 12th of last year, Berg Campus was donated to Woodlands Academy, and he remains the same in appearance today. Now this is the next phase, Phase 2 of the master plan for the combined Woodlands Academy campus. It's somewhat difficult to pick out the details from this picture here, so the following slides will highlight the details of Phase 2. Let's begin with the current status. In the northeast corner of that upper right-hand corner is the main academic building of Woodlands. It's labeled as A. No changes are being proposed to that portion of the campus. Construction of the cell tower, that's labeled B, will begin on Monday, this coming Monday, July 22nd. And again, no changes are being proposed to the cell tower site. A new access road is being planned. That's labeled D. It's in red, if you can see that from here. The large parking lot will be removed, and a new access road will run past the cemetery and generally along the tree line. The cemetery, marked C, will be maintained as a quiet site for reflection, meditation, and inspiration. It's actually one of the best parts of this gift to the from the Berg campus. We've been working with Sister Martha Curry, who wrote a recently published book on Berg College, to identify the women who are buried in the cemetery. We learned that there are approximately 50 grave sites, some of which were moved from their original burial spots near our school when it was located on Taylor Street in Chicago. Identifying these women, whom we fondly refer to as our Hall of Famers, will allow us to honor their pioneering work beginning in Chicago in 1857. Next, we have planned level playing fields. For those of you who have been to our campus, you may know that our primary field has a slope to it, and it's undersized. We'll now have a regulation-size softball field that's marked as letter E, and a level regulation-size field hockey and soccer field, labeled F. The other open areas will be used as outdoor gathering spaces for school community, outdoor religious services, picnics, even classes. The roadways. With respect to the roadways, we had several objectives. We wanted a continuous loop to improve access during normal traffic and for police and fire as well. As a further health and safety improvement, moving the main entrance further west will dramatically improve sightlines. This will also result in a reduction of curb cuts by one as we eliminate the existing entrance, our existing one, and also eliminate the old Berg campus exit. Another objective was to use as much of the existing roadways as possible by resurfacing the roadbed. We wanted to disturb as little of the ground as necessary. Now, more than half of the new roadway, which is marked in purple on this depiction, is on existing roadbed. Total length of the roadway is a bit less than 3/4 of a mile. And we'll have more comments about that parking lot to the very south end of that picture in a moment. 4 new parking areas, which are marked in red here, will be established. The south lot, the very south end of the graph up there, shows that there will be 40 spaces, 8 of which are handicapped. Proceeding a bit north to the soccer field and what's the Cooney building in white there, there will be 20 spaces, including 5 handicap spaces. And then behind the Cooney building, the current 6 spaces will be retained, including 1 handicap space. Then lastly, there'll be an overflow lot to the east where there'll be 29 spaces and no handicap spaces, which brings a total of 95 spaces, including 14 handicap spaces, and that is in excess of what's the required minimum percentage. The existing Cooney building is and will be multi-purpose, all relating to educational activities, receptions, meetings, retreats, shelter from inclement weather during games, and other imaginative uses as an indoor gathering space. There will be a walking path shown here in brown, which measures roughly 9/10 of a mile. It will take advantage of the open spaces, the views of the ravines, and the tree lines. As mentioned in the staff report, the walking path is outside the 20-foot steep slope setback. Here are the front lawn areas. Now there are 2 segments. K, the one on the right, is our current front lawn. A conservation easement currently under review by the city will be granted to the city to preserve as an open area. Now, we've been in favor of this from the beginning. In fact, many of us are hoping that a community group will attempt to reestablish Shakespeare on the Green. The front lawn area is approximately 1.75 acres. The second area marked L is owned by the city. The ordinance passed by the city asked us to consider use of this triangle parcel, which was created when the railroad overpass was constructed in 1942. The triangle was part of the approval of the Barrow Woods development and included the plan to transfer this unbuildable parcel to Barrow Woods. Our proposal is to have the city transfer the parcel to Woodlands, which we will make part of the conservation easement. We'll also install a new parking lot, establishing access to the bike path and to the athletic fields. The triangle is about 1.2 acres and brings the total of protected open space to nearly 3 acres, preserving the open area and the view along nearly the entire southern boundary of our property. This is a very positive result for the city, for its residents, and for Woodlands, with the open areas to be maintained in perpetuity. If the city anticipates any municipal use of the triangle, then the plan will revert back to our existing boundaries, and we will remove the parking lot from the triangle from our Phase 2 plan. The ravine areas. Interest by the Plan Commission and the City Council in the ravines is noted. We support this interest. Our plan includes partnering with any interested conservation groups or other residents to clean the ravine areas and to maintain them. This could be combined as a service project for our students, parents, and other members of the Woodlands community and the larger community. This could also develop into an action plan for other ravine areas within the city. Woodlands' responsibility for the ravines will be the same as any other property owner with ravines. The old signage at the existing entrance will be moved and updated, just as the new entryways move further to the west. A donor has contacted us with a particular interest in the front signage. She asked that we make it look nice, and so we shall. The entryway to the west will have signage to identify it as an entry point for both the bike path and the athletic fields. And we'll work with the city to find an acceptable solution for the signage. The area marked O, sort of next to the Woodlands building at the very top, is a rather sharp turn around the north edge of the ravine. We have identified this as one that may require a guardrail. We are sensitive to the issue, and we will rely on expert opinion about the need for guardrails. A fitting memorial for Old Main will be constructed on the campus at nearly the precise spot below the cupola and the front door. Our intent, to the extent feasible, given its state of repair, is to salvage as much of the cupola as is reasonably usable in constructing a memorial, which at a minimum will include salvageable bricks from the exterior of the Old Main building. So this is Phase 2 with the appropriate areas highlighted. The individual details should be a bit more recognizable now that we've gone through them. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we proceed, I did not ask for declaration of conflicts of interest or ex parte contacts by members of the commission on this item. Are there any?
No.
Thank you very much. Okay. Comments by staff?
Yes, thank you, Chairman Lay. I feel like the Plan Commission has been talking about BARA for the last decade. And I feel compelled to start by stepping back a bit and reminding the commission, I don't believe any of you were on the commission, but not too many years ago, redevelopment of this site was approved with up to 120 units. And certainly what you see today is a very unique opportunity. It certainly creates a site that is much less intense as far as use goes. I think, as I noted in the staff report, there really are no surprises with this Phase 2. The ordinance adopting the master plan occurred, I lose track, but about a year ago, and this project has been moving forward as envisioned by that master plan. Mr. Elwert noted Phase 1 was approved. The permit for the cell tower has been issued. And this second phase of the plan is exactly as we expected to see it. A few key points. No new structure, no new hardscape is proposed within the steep slope setback. Very significant as part of the master plan. Protecting the ravines was key, and assuring that we not encroach toward the ravines with any new development is really a big part of that. A high priority was shifting the access. Not only do you eliminate one curb cut on Sheridan Road, but you pull the entrance driveway away from that blind curve. And as Woodlands has noted a number of times, you do have many students who are driving there. You have people going to work along Sheridan Road. In combination with shifting that entranceway, city engineering staff will also work to assure that a proper crosswalk is aligned to get people across the street in that area, and again, move that crosswalk away from the curve. The entry, what you're doing tonight is approving the next phase of the master plan. Once this is approved, then we will work with Woodlands to implement the various aspects of this plan. For instance, when they're ready to do the entrance road, they will prepare an engineering plan, they will prepare a landscape plan, they will prepare a plan for new signage and new lighting, and those will all be reviewed at the staff level. If there was some significant change, something may need to be forwarded to the Building Review Board, but there's nothing, as we see it on this plan, that's significant enough to require another board review. Mr. Elwert talked about area labeled L. That is what's fondly known as the city triangle piece. It's a parcel that really has been identified as surplus city property. As he noted, this was part of the Barrow Woods development. At that time, the city pretty much said, we'd like to get rid of it, it's your responsibility. The requirement was that access and some parking spaces be maintained to get on the bike path. A very similar use is now proposed by Woodlands. Certainly the Plan Commission should weigh in on whether or not that use is appropriate, but the ultimate decision on whether this property would be transferred would rest with the City Council. I will note, I've been asked to note that with this proposal coming up again for the city to transfer this property to a private owner, we have asked our Public Works staff to look at the site to determine if for any reason it would be needed for a storage area or a shed, knowing that currently we're still using the Laurel Avenue property as kind of an east side storage area. This property has some limitations in that area. It certainly is an area that visually would be nice to preserve as a natural area. It's close to the bike path, the access is difficult, so this may not be the right site to serve that need, but I can't sit here and tell you tonight that the city is ready to transfer the property. From a planning perspective, I believe it would be a good move and it fits well with this plan. Other than that, I really have no other comments other than to say this is what we expected, and based on that, and based on the consistency of this master plan with the original special use permit ordinance, staff does recommend approval.
Very good. Thank you, Kathy. Are there any questions by the commissioners of the petitioner or of staff at this point?
Yes, I have a couple.
Go ahead, Jim.
Thank you. Very impressed with the plan. It's in line with our prior approvals, so thanks for all your work on this. A couple of questions I had around the safety of the roadways. So the existing entry to the school will be eliminated then and paved over and landscaped, I take it?
That's correct. In fact, if you look at that depiction there, the walkway is, walking path is pretty much where the existing entrance is.
Okay, great. And so it always made more sense, I think, the Berg College entryway for years as well.
Absolutely.
to
In
your
fact,
point
this
for-
is almost the identical location that we had planned with the Barrow Woods development, recognizing even back then that we would seize the opportunity to move it further west.
Okay. Are these fields to be used for competition, for inter-school competition, that sort of thing?
Yes.
Do you think you have enough parking for those sorts of uses?
Absolutely. We currently, if you can see the tennis courts in the upper right-hand corner, immediately to the south of those tennis courts is our sloped, undersized field.
Right.
And as it is now, we have enough parking there to accommodate the competition that we have on that field.
We have
which
the
is both soccer
existing
and
parking there at the older school, and then new parking here, the
and new
95
parking
additional
here
spaces.
all around this field, both those fields, we have more than enough parking for that.
Okay. Currently, you may, well, I'm sure you probably can't answer it. How has historically the cemetery been maintained, and how are you going to maintain it in the future?
I'm sort of biting through my tongue because I'm not sure that the cemetery has been maintained at all since it was transferred away from DePaul University, certainly. And I can't speak to what happened much before that.
Right.
How will it be maintained going forward? Much better. We really do. This is our school. This was our school when it was first established, and this does mean an awful lot to us. The women who are buried there are legends to the students, to the faculty, and to the staff at our school. That is a place where people will be going just to be quiet, just alone, just to think. It will be very nicely maintained.
Thank you. One or two other questions. As you probably remember from a prior hearing when we approved it, I was concerned about the tearing down of Old Main. Now that we had all had agreed that that would happen, I appreciate your respecting the history and protecting the cupola and some of the additional stones there as well, so thank you. My final question is around, this is phase 2, is there contemplated to be a phase 3, and is there any details around that? Is there a time frame, or are we just done?
Will there be a phase 3? Absolutely. Is there one being contemplated? Absolutely not. This is as far as we're taking it at this juncture. This is to satisfy our immediate needs. We're not looking any further than this phase at this moment. Once we get this done, we still have a school that we have to operate, and that's where a lot of our energies and our focus of attention is right now. At some point in the future, certainly, things will change. It'll probably be well beyond my tenure, and maybe the tenure of many people, and even in this room. We'll see. If something were to change, though, we'd definitely come back, and we would call that phase 3.
Right. Thank you.
Okay.
Ralph, a question for you regarding the cell tower. I know many months ago you told me, Augie, we're in the education business, not the cell tower business, but it became a necessary to move it in order to get Old Main down. Could you maybe just give us a little update as to the carriers, the contracts that are remaining, and if you're actively seeking more carriers, or if you're just looking to fulfill the contracts you have right now?
Well, I was right then that this, not only are we in the education business, but I've been educated about cell towers and their operation, and I've learned much more than I ever wanted to, frankly, but it's been fascinating, and we've really enjoyed the process. As I said, the tower will be constructed beginning Monday morning. The process then will be, after construction of the tower, move the antennas to the new location, test them, make sure they're working, and then we can start demolition. With respect to the tower itself, there are currently 3 vendors that are on the Old Main building with their antennas. We're making arrangements for all 3 of those to move to the tower itself. At this point, I am reasonably certain that all 3 will be on that tower. We have 1 contract signed, we have 1 about to be signed, and we have an agreement that the other one will be signed. So that's not going to be much of a problem. There are others that are interested in being on this tower. It probably wouldn't be appropriate to get into designating who those are at this point. We're at the very, very early stages of those discussions. But I would not be surprised if 1 or even 2 more were interested in getting on this tower. How many we can accommodate is another issue. We'll have to cross that bridge when we get to it. But cell reception on the east side of Lake Forest is a very important matter to everybody. It is to us as well. We were residents there too. A number of our parents have complained that there's at least one company where you can receive absolutely no reception within the school building itself. There's good and bad about that in a school. But our objective is to see how many we can accommodate, not as a profit-making venture for us, but merely as a service for the city and for the rest of the residents of the area.
Thank you.
Good. Further? Lloyd?
Yeah. First of all, I'm overjoyed that you're considering resumption of the Shakespeare on the Green. I have 5 or 6 T-shirts from previous productions that are getting rather worn out, so I'm looking forward to replenishment there. Following up on Commissioner Carris's question about Phase 3, your mandate from City Council allows you to consider, you may include but not be limited to athletic fields, sporting amenities, academic buildings, dormitories, faculty housing, art and performance buildings. If any of or all of those are at some point in time contemplated, are you comfortable that the way Phase 2 is structured can properly accommodate additions that may come into being in Phase 3?
Excellent question, Commissioner. The answer to your question is yes. We did anticipate this in the development of the plan. We asked our master planners who developed this wonderful graphic here to allow for that type of thing, just to put black boxes here and there so we could see where they would fit. As you look at this, you can see there's a couple of areas where it'd be pretty easy to build something and perhaps move a field over a little bit here or there. So there is some room there, some fairly substantial room there for building. And yes, we did anticipate that. As
When I look at that map, I see around the P,
Yes.
the J, the
Yes.
D, and then, of course, back in the A area where the existing
Exactly.
academic structures
Exactly.
are. Okay.
Okay.
I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Mr. Elbert, I have a question for you regarding the schematic, and Kathy, I'll ask you the same question as well, and that is parcel N, is in Nancy, that teardrop shaped parcel. From the aerial photographic map, it appeared to me that that's wooded. Is that right?
Not as wooded as it appears on this
Okay.
depiction. That is, again, our front entryway currently. If you turn down that driveway, you'll see that it's a full road that fits in there with room on either side of the road. But certainly there are some overhanging trees here and there.
Okay, my question is this. Looking at the schematic, parcel K is proposed for easement. And I would like to have some consideration and your thoughts on it, please, about including parcel N in that easement as well, subject to the conditions that you would be able to have it signed, to your satisfaction and those sorts of things as well. Is that something you'd be willing to entertain?
That's a tough question, Commissioner. I'm going to tell you, first of all, I don't have authority to say yes or no on that.
Okay.
That would require board approval, and we'd have to have a full discussion on that and come to an agreement as a board before we could make any sort of commitment. For purposes of tonight, I think we can leave that unanswered, but we can also leave it as an open question, which is, I think, what you're looking for. And we'd be happy to do that. Leave it as an open question for a discussion at some point. You'll note that there's nothing planned for that area other than the walking path along the existing driveway. We're not putting up a structure, we're not doing anything with it. So the question will remain the same tonight and until, or unless we come back with some further development plan. So we'll still have that opportunity to talk about that.
Okay.
And I would suggest that might be the easier way for all of us to deal with this right now.
Well, thank you. Kathy, would that make it some sense to consider that and have considerations between the city and,
Certainly, having that,
Woodlands.
the conservation easement follow along Sheridan Road through to the ravine, that certainly makes sense. It would be consistent with the ideal of protecting the Sheridan Road streetscape. As Mr. Elward said, there's nothing planned there, but once it's in a conservation easement, then we can be sure there wouldn't be parking or it's likely, given the proximity of the ravine, that not much could happen there anyway, but if not much could happen, then should it be protected by conservation easement? So I think it's a good question and would be interested in your thoughts on it.
okay.
I think the point is well taken. They can't, as part of our approval of Phase 2, they can't construct anything there today, even if
Correct.
we don't resolve that issue.
Understood.
Unless I misunderstand. So,
Okay.
just a quick question, Commissioner. Your question about the cell tower and its current status and future status is probably pretty relevant. I'd like to think that the city could work with your folks I'd rather not have us see another cell tower proposed for a space that's a couple hundred feet away from this, as opposed to working collectively right now as they construct the cell tower facility to replace the rooftop units. If that needs to be amended to some extent to accommodate all of our future cell tower considerations for that particular area, that to me might be a better solution than multiple towers at lesser heights.
Okay.
So I think it's just something that, probably needs to be understood.
Okay.
The walkway facility, will that provide for public access?
I think inevitably it's going to be public access. Part of it is the sidewalk along Sheridan Road there, the south end of Sheridan, or Wesley Road there. We don't intend this to be a gated community. We do intend it to be used. And frankly, a lot of people use it now. We see people walking through our property all the time, often with dogs. We'd certainly like them to continue to pick up after their dogs, or like any other homeowner would, but we're not saying no to anybody walking through there. Unless or until it became a problem, I can't see that we would want to limit it. It's there for enjoyment, it's there for use of people.
Further questions of the petitioner? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Next thing to take care of here, is there any public testimony on this item before us? Yes, sir, would you like to testify? Anybody else, I might ask? Can I swear you both in, please? Can you raise your right hand? Do you solemnly declare and affirm that the testimony you are about to give or have previously given is true and correct to the best of your knowledge? Thank you. Would you please give us your name and address, please?
Dr. Michael Williams, 428 Beverly. It's not testimony as much as a question. Commissioner Kuchman brought up the issue of modifying some of the conditions around the cell tower. I'd like to hear some commentary on that, because I hate for what was decided to become the thin end of a wedge. What are you thinking about in terms of modifying the cell tower?
I don't know that I'm thinking about modifying anything right now, but I want to make sure that whatever cell tower gets constructed there has the potential capacity to accommodate all of our future needs, as opposed to having multiple cell towers in the area.
I don't disagree, but being on the ad hoc committee that was involved in elaborating on the cell tower, I'm a little bit concerned that the 110 foot will now become 150.
Right now, it's at 110, right?
Yes.
So, I don't know.
I should point out that if there's any deviation, we're going to start discussion all over again.
I think you can bank on that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your testimony.
Good evening, I'm John Centel. I live at 545 Circle Lane, and I also am a resident of Villa Turcom. But I come to you tonight as president of Lake Forest Openlands Association, and thank you to each of the Plan Commission members for your careful consideration of this master plan in this important natural, historic, and recreational corridor in our city. My comments to the commission will be brief tonight. I'd like to start by saying that Lake Forest Openlands commends our city and Woodlands Academy for working together to put together a conservation easement to protect this important vista, lawn, natural site, and recreational connection along Sheridan Road. This conservation easement on the lawn will be a great asset to our community, the Villa Turcom neighborhood, and the Sheridan Road neighbors by protecting this important streetscape and helping to buffer the connectivity in the contiguous ravine. I did have a couple of suggestions which we asked the commission to consider for the benefit of the community. First, we ask that the connection to the bike trail be maintained off Sheridan Road and through what is described as Section L, otherwise known as Old Wesley Road. This is consistent with the vision for our community bike plan and contributes a key linkage for our southeastern community. A connection in this spot is the safest, most convenient connection to the Prairie Bike Path, and it would be a terrific loss to the residents if this were eliminated. We're also pleased to see that the entrance road moved further west for the safety and away from the ravine. We suggest that for recreation and biking safety, that a crosswalk be established at driveway N. Finally, we recommend that to improve the conservation easement to protect the entire front lawn and vistas in perpetuity, and importantly, give a visual demonstration to the residents as to the protection of this area, that the final conservation easement be pushed slightly further to the north, closer to where the proposed cupola memorial will be placed, and moreover, also extended to the east in section N to the abandoned driveway and contiguous to the ravine where the original open space once extended to. This will ensure that this vista and open space will always be recognized by the community for years and years to come as a protected and historic green space along Sheridan Road. Both visually and optically, this will be viewed very positively by our community and the residents. Again, we commend the city for securing this conservation easement, and we continue to offer any assistance we can to provide help to make Woodland's South Campus border and Waldron Ravine an asset for our entire community. On behalf of Open Lands, thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. Okay, commission discussion and comment at this point.
I'd like to ask staff about Mr. Sentel's suggestions about a conservation easement in the front lawn area.
I think it's, as Chairman Lay raised, that it certainly has merit to extend that conservation easement along the frontage of Sheridan Road. I think that was, that would be consistent with the intent to preserve that streetscape. I think it doesn't hamper Woodlands, certainly in the future, if they wanted to put parking there, if they wanted to put some kind of a structure other than signage that would require coming back with another phase of the master plan. Certainly the conservation easement could be written to allow some entrance landscaping, low-scale lighting, and signage. But that would certainly be consistent with previous discussions. And I might just respond to the other comments while I have the microphone. There is every intention to maintain a bike path across L, whether it remains in city ownership or whether it would be a requirement if that property was transferred to Woodlands, and I believe Woodlands understands that and has every intention to provide that bike path.
Would you suggest incorporating that into a recommendation?
A requirement for a bike path?
Yes.
You certainly could include that as a condition. I also wanted to respond to Mr. Williams' question. Phase 1 of the master plan specifically approved the cell tower at 110 feet. Unless a new phase of the master plan came forward, there can be no increase in height in that cell tower. So it would be a very significant, a very public event and discussion based on our conversations with the wireless providers. We do believe that the 110-foot tower, along with some other new technologies, really will provide much improved service to the southeast quadrant of Lake Forest. Thank you.
Could I just follow up with another question of you, Kathy? There was also a suggestion made about maintaining space K, or the front lawn, in perpetuity. Does the city have any thoughts on that?
Yes, we currently do have a draft conservation easement, as was required by the special use permit. The draft conservation easement was provided to us by Woodlands. We are currently in the review process, and that conservation easement does exactly that.
In perpetuity?
In perpetuity, yes. And it may allow events such as the Shakespeare on the Green Festival.
And then finally, expanding that easement to the north to around where the cupola site is proposed.
From staff's perspective, it would be more important to extend the easement to the east along the frontage of Sheridan Road. Certainly, the more open land that's preserved, the better. But keep in mind, as I think Commissioner Kuchman said, the only things that can happen on this property without it coming back to the Plan Commission for approval of Phase 3 is what you see here. So there wouldn't be any rights given to develop that area just to the north of K through this plan.
Good enough. Thank you.
Discussion on the matter before us.
Well, I have a question.
Proceed.
There's two questions. The first one's for Kathy. Kathy, how big is parcel L? The triangle? Do you recall? The half an acre?
1.2 acres.
1.2. Okay, thank you. The next question is a question for the petitioner. We've talked a bit about public access. We've talked a bit about walkways, pathways, bike paths, and what have you. I think that's a great benefit to the community, but also, I don't have a daughter who's attending the school there, but I would be concerned about the safety of the students. Have you given that thought? Is there any protections that you have with that? Are there, because this is private property here, essentially.
It
And you
is.
have the rights to, protect your students.
You're
So
absolutely right.
could you address that for me, please?
I'd be happy to. If we look at, for example, Lake Forest Academy, it's a wide-open campus. Same thing, anybody can drive in there at any time and walk around the fields. We would anticipate that sort of thing may happen here. I don't think it's going to happen with all that much frequency. If you look at the location of the walking path, it's essentially on this side of the ravine, that is to say, the sort of southwest side of the ravine, whereas now the academic activities are all on the north side of the ravine. That provides some separation. Indeed, it's even hard to get from one place to another right now, other than the access road to the north and then the access road to the very east. So we believe there's enough of a separation there to allow for the safety that we would need to operate the school.
Okay, thank you.
I think also, I'm pretty familiar with this property, and I've noticed that you've taken that access road to the bike path, and you've looped it up into your site.
Correct.
Whereas currently, you can actually continue straight on Sheridan, and I like what you've done here. Even as a resident, it's a nice way to sort of make it even more private for us. Were somebody to park there, it's a little bit more private than having someone going through town more easily, able to pull in and get involved, and maybe in not such a great way, so.
Well, and your familiarity with this property bears here quite significantly. I would like to tell you that I was the one who designed it so that the road would go up north like that. But I have a law degree, I don't have an engineering degree. Our engineers said, it's better to bring it up like that. It'll allow for better traffic flow when it comes to re-entering Wesley or Sheridan Road there. And it would make for better separation of traffic as well. I think it makes for a much smarter design.
Yeah. For security, I like it as well.
Agree.
Thank you. The pleasure of the commission on this item. We have before us a recommendation to approve this phase 2 of the Woodlands Academy Master Plan to the City Council with 5 conditions of approval that are contained in the staff analysis and recommendations. Discussion on that. You ready for a motion?
Are you, is it your intent to include parcel N as part of the easement?
I'd like to.
Incorporate that?
I think that's up to the commission. My suggestion to the commission on that point, since petitioner said that, and that hasn't gone through their review process, I would recommend that we not attach that as a condition of approval here this evening, but instead we recommend to both petitioner and staff that that matter be actively discussed, but that it not be part of this approval process, since our approval of this means that nothing can be done with it anyway at this point.
Doesn't
I
appear to
don't-
be material.
That's right, I don't think it's a material condition at this stage. So that's what I would recommend that we do with that this evening.
Mr. Commissioner, I might add, just as a matter of record, that I don't think we should pursue an agenda that would include extending the easement of item K further to the cupola, further restricting the rights of a private property owner who's making great strides to try to do the right thing here for all parties involved. So that's my personal. But I think we should definitely make sure that the bike path is maintained at some level. Okay. Especially given the work that we've been doing on that.
I think, Mr. Kuchman, I think what we could do in that regard is take after we deal with the recommendation and conditions, we can then perhaps take a separate vote on that matter. Would that be okay? Sure. Just to get the sense of the commission at this stage. If indeed the votes aren't here to pursue that, then we wouldn't pursue it. If the votes are here to pursue it, let the discussions occur. Is that acceptable?
That's fine.
Okay. Okay, is there a motion on this item?
There is. I move that we accept the staff's recommendation to approve the Phase 2 development as proposed with the 5 conditions referred to by staff.
Okay,
You want to make a
is there a second?
bike path reference in addition?
With a secondary recommended vote on the bike path.
Okay. I thought that was just the
maintenance
easement, though,
proposal.
that we were talking about.
Okay. While you're at it,
All right, sorry.
do you want to include a crosswalk?
Yeah, actually, 2 crosswalks, I
Okay.
think.
Oh,
Okay.
I like that crosswalk idea,
Yes.
absolutely.
Where?
As Mr. Centel said, at letter N off of Sheridan, and then also probably at the entrance to L. I think it makes sense, because the walking path crosses the drive apron at both spots.
Okay.
So moved.
Okay, and it's been moved and seconded. Is there discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. And I'd like to also get the sense of the commission on pursuing the easement matter. Jeff thinks it's not a good idea. I think it should at least be discussed and pursued. The parties obviously have to agree to that. There has to be a joint agreement on it. So what's the sense of the commission?
You mean in the area above K?
No.
Specifically, N, pushing K further to east to the ravine.
Oh, in that regard, I'm in favor of that, but not making K move any further to the north.
Okay,
Likewise, I agree.
okay, I agree with that.
I'm in favor of the discussion, but it's up to the owner.
Understood.
Agreed.
Okay,
Agree.
okay, very good.
Commissioner Berg's
Okay.
statement, assessment, whatever you want to call it.
Good. Okay, the matter stands approved, or no, we took the vote.
Yep.
Question?
Was the condition for the bike path, to assure that a bike path remains in an appropriate location, was that part of the original motion? I was unclear.
Yes,
Okay, thank you. I'll
and
make
as
sure
were
the
the
minutes
two
reflect.
crosswalks,
Correct.
yes. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you very much. Good luck. Okay, the next item before us is item number 5. Discussion of previously approved development parameters for the city-owned parcel located at 110 East Laurel Avenue. I would say to those in attendance, there will be no action taken on this evening. The purpose of it is to extend the discussions that the commission had in a work session approximately a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. And we want to hear public testimony on the matter as well, so that then we can, at our next meeting in August, take up the matter and then make recommendations to the city council as to whether and how the parameters for Laurel Avenue might be modified. Okay? At this point, I would ask the commission, is there any conflicts of interest or ex parte contacts by members of the commission on this matter? Okay, thank you very much. We will dispense with these initial comments on the parameters. I think we'll combine that with the last bullet, the general discussion of the parameters. So at this point, Kathy, would you?
If you're ready to move into discussion, Lee Brown, president of Teskin Associates, is here. The commission has met with Mr. Brown a couple times over the past 12 months, and he's here to give you an overview of the parameters as they were approved and help you move your discussion forward as directed by the council.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Please proceed.
Well, I think my role is more of a facilitation than necessarily directing the discussion, but let me start with figure out how to use the, you We have a directive from City Council, and it looks back at the changes that have occurred essentially from the time that the parameters were put in place in 2008, and saying considerable time has passed since the acceptance, and changes have occurred locally and regionally related to the development activity. It is in the best interest of the city and its residents to review and reconsider the previously adopted or accepted parameters, which is to underscore the fact that they are not calling for change, they are calling for review. If no change is made in the parameters, that may still be the most consistent and appropriate thing before you, but we wanted to bring before you the parameters as they were adopted and consider whether they remain in the best interest of the community, in the best interest of making rational and appropriate use of the property ultimately, and the protection of the property and the interests of surrounding properties.
I agree. I'm going to say so.
Just want to take that. Why do we have the parameters? Well, working backwards, at the time, the city went through a process of inviting developer interest in the site. We will ultimately get to that point as well. And before we get there, it makes sense for us to choose the best and most appropriate parameters that will help direct the potential reuse of the site. And that should be on the basis, in part, on protecting and enhancing the value and the livability of the city, on implementing the goals established in the comprehensive plan and other policy documents, and enhancing the marketability and the value of the site. And when we talk about marketability, we're saying identify what is achievable and desirable for the site, attract and guide the private development interests, establish the highest degree of predictability for both the community and the potential developer. So it is not necessarily the most stringent set of rules. It is the ones that will guide the developer to construct or develop that which is most appropriate for the site, recognizing its context, and encouraging the highest and best rational use of the site without having a negative effect on the surrounding properties. But ultimately, we hope to choose that limited set of standards or parameters as they were drawn in 2008 or as amended now, so that as we invite property development interests, they have guidelines that will help them understand that there's a straight direction, straight line between working with the city and getting approval in a way that will benefit everyone. The city's comprehensive plan, the one that was adopted in 1998, identifies the use of the property as a transitional zone, and essentially transitioning between 6 land use classifications, including the central business district to the south and residential districts to the northeast and southwest. And that forms a larger transitional zone that includes properties to the south of Laurel as well. The Plan Commission first studied the transitional area in 1981, and that time it was felt that the area would be appropriate for businesses requiring greater area, as an example, a grocery store. And this is text directly out of the comprehensive plan. It was also felt that non-single family residential along with office might be appropriate usage for the area. Further, in that comprehensive plan, it indicates with the development of the Jewel grocery store south of the study area, the need for another business no longer remains a viable consideration. So rather than looking for a large property for a large use, it was no longer seen as a commercial first extension of downtown. In addition, other large business uses would not be desirable due to their adverse impact on the surrounding residential neighborhood, particularly in terms of traffic, issues that will remain with us as we go through this. Further, in the comp plan, it states, therefore, multifamily residential units with mix of retail and or office uses limited to the frontage on Western Avenue should be designated for the parcels north, and it also included properties to the south of Laurel Avenue. A portion of the municipal services property fronting Western Avenue and south of Franklin Place should be designated with park and recreation uses. No specific no specific relationship to or calling out the oak tree that we all have concern about, but in particular the calling out of open space on the site and connecting to the Franklin Place Park. Development parameters were established by the Western and Laurel Avenues Redevelopment Committee and the City Council as a result of the 2007-2008 review in preparation for redevelopment. And those are the parameters that you're asked to review and consider. The site was anticipated to be redeveloped primarily residential, with the western 1/3 of the site as single-family attached or detached units, and the eastern 2/3 of the site as single-family and multifamily units, such as condos, apartments, row houses, and townhomes. The option for small-scale retail or service businesses was used, service business uses was retained, but only on the ground floor and only within the B2 zoned portion of the site in the southeast corner, if you remember the B2 being closest to the business district and the northern L-shape north and west portions of the site being in the residential district. The parameters include no office uses and no standalone commercial uses. The overall density of the site should not exceed 13 residential units per acre, but the caveat being, it is recommended that the inclusion of affordable units be required, but in no case exceed an overall density of 15 units per acre. So there was an anticipation that if affordable units were part of the project, there would be essentially the bonus of additional density. A maximum of 3 stories in height and a minimum of 30% of the 30% open space be provided on the site. So those were largely the parameters that you're being asked to consider. We'll give you some more details when we get into site access and the like as we move through. But I wanted to take the diversion, if you will, for the moment about thinking through the density and the height issue. We have suggested that there are a number of places around the metropolitan area that you might visit to consider how height and density are both accommodated or not accommodated on developments that stand as an example of doing it right or not doing it right, or the difference between the same density and how it is essentially presented or how you perceive of it when you're on the site or adjacent to the site. And the fact is that not all 12 units per acre looks the same. Not all 12 units to the acre generates traffic on adjacent properties that might be seen as a detriment. It is about the way it is laid out. It is about the architecture and the materials. It is about the landscaping, and it is about the treatment of the adjacent properties. And so I'm hoping as you think through this over the next few weeks that you get an opportunity of second guessing what density number means and how it is perceived once development is in place. You have the opportunity of seeing some good or bad and talking to each other about what density really is right for this site. So we gave you some examples. One here is in Winnetka. It's called Hedgerow. It's been there for about 16 years. It's on Green Bay Road, just north of Willow Road. Now, I'm not trying to suggest to you that this is what development will or could or should look like on the subject site, but I am suggesting that these are examples to think about in terms of density and height. And so here is a 3-story condominium unit. It is 40 total units on just about 2 acres, so a smaller site and a much more elongated, narrow along the roadway site. But again, it shows that with, this is my perception, with very significant landscaping, that some of the impacts of density can be ameliorated. Remember that this property, I don't know if you've had a chance to see it, but on the western side of this is single-family homes directly up against the back side of these units. And they have done a pretty good job in buffering between this and the adjacent properties. So this is 21 dwelling units to the acre, and you have to decide for yourself, does it feel like 21 or does it feel like some lower number because of the amount of landscaping they've included on this site? Again, 3 stories. Second example, this is at essentially, there are two examples that we're going to talk about at this intersection at Winnetka Road at Hap. Two-story townhouses. These are actually sort of surprising to me, 27 years old. Tells me how long I've been around. But this is, again, a relatively small site, 2 acres, surrounded by a mix of uses, residential primarily, multifamily to the south, single family to the east, and some mix of light industry to the west. This is 12 units to the acre. So this is the potential feel of the high density that you're indicating under the existing parameters for the site. This is 2-story over garage, which is a unit type that may be ultimately an appropriate unit type. The feel on this is, to me, higher than 12 units to the acre because of the relatively the high amount of asphalt to the site and less landscaping and more stuck amongst other activities. So this one feels a little bit denser than its actual density is. Part of that is that the density is lower because it's 2 stories as opposed to 3 stories of residential. Across the street, if you will, across Winnetka Road is a much larger sized site, actually closer to the subject site. This is 12 and a half acres in area compared to the 10 acres of the Laurel and Western site. And this is a 3-story residential condominiums, which the ultimate density is 14 dwelling units to the acre, including that lake that you may not realize is in the middle of a fairly oval-shaped layout of residences. The difference here is that the residential parking is underground, and the perception of the site's density is affected by the fact that all that parking underground is not surface parking, and you don't see the asphalt parking lots like you do across the street. So here, the 14 dwelling units to the acre is probably perceived as a lower density than the 12 across the street. This is Regent Woods. It is at the corner further west at Winnetka Road and Waukegan Road, now in Glenview. The other 2 were in Northfield, I believe. This is, again, a tight site with a lot of units in a densely landscaped environment. And though the density is close to the 12 units that are the parameters for the subject site, I think the height in this case generates a feeling of higher density. So here's the question that you should be asking yourself. Is it the feel, or is it the impact of the density that we are trying to concern ourselves with? And so part of that is the question of what's the ability for the architect and the developer to hide the units, or to use the units in a way that it does not present large facades, unbroken facades, heights directly adjacent to sidewalks or walkways that seem much taller and much denser. Laurel Court in Highland Park, these are larger individual units, lower footprint but high density because there is almost nothing but the buildings on the site. I don't think that I would use the term shoehorn because I think that it is well laid out, but it feels the full density of the 22 dwelling units per acre. And here is nearby. Now we're getting into a 5-story condition. And in that 5 stories, they begin to approach the upper max of the densities that are allowed in Highland Park, which in this zone is 50 dwelling units to the acre. Now, I hope you will debate the sense of density on this one. And I think what you mostly perceive is the height, and not necessarily the fairly intense development itself, because again, you've got underground parking or parking that's hidden and not really dramatically presenting a large hardscape.
These are individual dwellings on every floor, right?
Yes, I believe that's the case. These are.
Whereas the previous one was one
They are
dwelling.
two-unit type, or two-level units.
Oh, they are two
Yeah.
level units?
Three-story condos, these are individual floor units, I believe. In that sort of middle ground between the 12 and the sort of mid-20 density that condominiums often are found to be developed. And a lot of the density is driven by the requirement for parking and the requirement for elevators and the requirements for fire prevention construction technique that drive the cost of the unit and therefore the need to cover the amount of units per acre of land to cover those costs. So some of this is driven by the economics, not necessarily the architecture, but they all must meet, all of these are market rate, if you will, that they are driven by what the market will bear. Many of these you would consider luxury apartments or condos because of the size of the unit, the amenities inside, and ultimately the value per square foot or the value per site. So what we're asking then is for you to consider, how do I measure on this site what the impact of 12 or 15 dwelling units per acre, 13 or 15 dwelling units per acre as the current standard or parameter suggests. Do you want me to pause here for a second? Okay. So let's go on to some of the other parameters. Streets and access, parking, preservation of landscape, site amenities, and setbacks. And so we thought it necessary to at least consider how different type of buildings could be laid out on the site to consider whether or not the parameters that we have will inhibit or encourage a variety of layouts. The reason that we asked this question is that the standard for access talks about whether or not access is provided to the north to Franklin only for single-family access and not for the potential for multifamily or serving the multifamily, and whether or not it creates a through connection between Franklin and Western. And so we laid out a series of different dwelling types to see, one, could it meet the parameters as they were established? And again, we are not trying to suggest to you that these are desirable or what you will see when a developer presents them. We are using them as an exercise in what do these kinds of building types look like as laid out. And so here is, on the western side, 10 individual single-family home sites. They meet the GR1 standard, which says a minimum of 50 feet in width of lot and a minimum of 6,250 square feet. Some of these are actually considerably larger than that. But the intent here was to say it was our perception of the way the parameters were laid out in 2008 that the guidance of the western third of the site being single family to provide the buffering to the single family uses to the west. Some of the discussion we should have is whether the residential type or the building type is the best way of providing transition versus significant landscaping, significant setback, some other devices that may be considered. The eastern two-thirds then is shown here as three-story multifamily buildings, two large buildings that have the potential for at 1,000 square foot unit each. So that's giving you a sense of the size of a residential apartment or condo or however the ownership might occur. At 1,000 square foot each, you could get up to 186 individual dwellings in there. Now that well exceeds the maximum density that would be allowed, given that you've only got 10 total acres. So all we're doing there is not telling you someone should build at that density. We're saying that the site itself could accommodate that if the parameter did not limit that. We have a little over 37% of the site being both an expanded Franklin Park and the protection of the oak tree out in front of the municipal former municipal services building, and landscape and open space in amongst the multifamily. It doesn't really count the open space that would be as part of the single family on the west. This is an open courtyard that would allow for access essentially into underground parking. The second concept,
Excuse me,
go ahead.
is it appropriate for questions? Just real briefly, on concept A, what would the overall density of that be in comparison to that 13 units per acre
That's essentially 20 units
It's
per
co-
acre
overall?
overall,
Okay.
because you get 186 plus 10
Thank you.
on 10 acres. It's nice that it's a 10-acre unit because I can divide it that way.
So 20 units per acre, has an economic impact analysis been performed about what is the cost to the city in terms of services, support, schools, overall burden or benefit from the taxes collected versus the costs of services provided?
We did some initial sense of value to try to get to the question of whether or not there is value to rent rate or value to sales rate matches the market, but we haven't done a fiscal impact. And part of that is the directive from City Council was, it's not about the price. At this stage, Council had directed us to say, it's about the quality, it's about the character, it's about the fit within the community. Ultimately, it has to make sense within the market, but the decision on whether it should be this density or that should not be driven by the dollar figure at this stage.
Doesn't need to be driven by it, but I absolutely believe it has to be understood. So, I think anything we contemplate, as much as it is a breakdown of units per acre, there should be a corresponding breakdown of net benefit and cost to the city.
And I think that you're right, that as PP&L begins to look at the issues of what's the best way to deliver the appropriate developer to the community and make it a marketable site, they do have to look at that set of numbers. I just didn't think that was the driving aspect for us to consider for the density questions at this stage.
But we are being asked to consider the relative positioning of certain aspects and certain quality we're ascribing conditions in theory to portions of the space in a void, in my humble opinion. So, I'd like to see that overall picture presented as part of our basic analysis before we can go back and say whether the 2008 recommendations remain valid or invalid. That's one person's opinion.
Could I ask then, Jeff, to paraphrase, are you suggesting that the more people that would live here would put more stress on the city?
Well, I'm saying.
And that's not bad, I'm just
Yeah,
trying,
or it could be a benefit. I mean, they could
Okay.
be, the tax base created could more than offset the cost to the city. Or it could be, an ongoing burden to the city. If 20 units an acre puts 100 new kids at school at $18,000, $19,000 a year, net cost to the municipality, I'd like to understand what that is. If they're paying for collecting, substantially less than the net cost, then I think that has something to do with what we consider in terms of density and impact.
And it does get complex on the basis of what's the type of unit, because
That's right.
a two-bedroom condo generates a different number of school children than a three-bedroom or a single-family home.
Or a resident, or a
Right, so you may-
semi-retirement community.
I can show you examples where a single-family low density generates more school children than a relatively high-density multifamily.
Proceed with B.
Okay.
Well, I just wanted to ask one quick question. In terms of quality of open space, since that's the feature of the easternmost development, you said that was the central court, but it looks like it's probably going to be all asphalt, because is it vehicular?
This is not being counted as open space.
But that's vehicular, right?
It's vehicular.
Okay.
That's open parking. It isn't all the parking necessary to serve 186 units. It's just that we often suggest that there be some surface parking for guests and other things.
Okay.
No, the open space that I'm talking about is
The peripheral.
the peripheral open spaces.
So for a quality of open space, the central court area is probably on a level, on a 1 to 10 level, probably pretty low since it's all
In this
asphalt.
particular, and let's keep them at the concept level, that was, that open space in, that open area, asphalt probably, landscaped in our best opportunity, is not a play yard. It's not a space that contributes to active recreation. It definitely keeps the sense of density down in that the buildings are separated, but it isn't put there for the purpose of creating that open, to cover the 30% minimum. I will, however, show you in a few seconds where that might be the case. So let's look at B, and this is a mix of building types, but is largely, if you want to call townhomes a attached single family, then go right ahead, but I think that many people would consider it multifamily in any case. But the units along this western end are townhome units, and there are additional townhomes in a cluster character here, and so the total of 46 two-story above garage units. So similar to what you saw in that graphic in Northfield, where the density was based on 2 levels of townhome above a 2-car garage. That's the type of units that we're suggesting might be laid out in this manner. And then this larger feature is a 3-story multifamily. Now, in this case, based again on that 1,000 square foot standardized unit, that allows for up to 111 dwelling units. So this is much closer to the 15 dwelling units to acre over the whole site. Again, we have open space on the periphery, the protection of the oak tree, an open area here. This is not parking. This is an open area. All the townhomes here would have garage units accessed from the rear. Okay. This, however, has an entry point and an exit point for the garage underground. Expensive, but a way of creating a greater amount of total open space on the site. So in this case, again, we're exceeding the 30% that was part of the parameters.
So on a level of 1 to 10, that one integrates the fabric into the community much better than the previous one.
On a level 1 to 10, yeah, I think it does. In part because I think that despite the fact that you have an access point here on Franklin, and you have another access point here on Laurel, the potential for folks walking through and making use of a public open space to integrate that, if you will, as part of the fabric of the extension of the grid pattern coming out of downtown, which was one of the items that we get to later, is that extension of the grid pattern. But this does say, if you call these single family, I'm not going to argue that, but if you call them single family because they're individually owned on individual lots, essentially in condo form, this provides access to the single family, but let's not ignore the fact that the access to the multifamily is still shown off that access point here or here. And so part of what Kathy and I have talked about is the need ultimately, or maybe relatively quickly, is a traffic analysis that says what kind of traffic would be generated on these kinds of layouts, these kinds of units, to understand where they would be going and where they would be coming from, in addition to, I think, considering a little bit more difficultly, but considering the pedestrian traffic that is likely to form. The way you lay out the site may encourage a greater amount of pedestrian traffic through the site. This is single family only. This is 37 single family dwelling units, access here on Western, access here on Laurel. It can't meet the 30% open space that's required by the parameters. So in order to meet that 30, you have to eliminate some of these units. If you're not going to count the open space that's in backyards, you have to only count what's on the periphery.
how would one access garaging and so forth with the previous?
I think the assumption here is that this is driveways off streets, even on Laurel.
Is there room for alleys?
There could, though that's not traditional, I think, in Lake Forest.
So this is 3.7 dwelling units per acre.
That's right. This is single-family residential density, 3.7. And that's consistent with that GR1 residential density. This again is single-family, different form of layout. This is private drives and easements rather than public streets. I'm not suggesting that there would be a gated community, but it changes the amount of right-of-way that's necessary to be dedicated to roadways. And so you get a greater number of single-family, which begins to look at 4.6 dwelling units to the acre, but still single-family density.
What width are those again?
I'm sorry?
What width are the lots?
These are 50-foot
50
lots.
still?
They still meet the standard for GR1, but the difference here is that we have private road access on these locations so that there is no direct driveway access off of Franklin or Laurel.
It's all off Western.
You have an access point on Western. You have two access points, one here on Laurel and one again on, well, excuse me, I think we have a third. I don't believe this one was intended to, oh, here we have, whoops, there's an access point here. So we have two access points for those private roadways. But again, that's a total of 46 dwelling units on that whole site. Different concept. This is a mix of two different building types. This is a total of 12 8-unit buildings. That's a total of 96 units in these two townhouse types. They could be 3-story in that we're showing, 3-story being 2 stories over 1 story, the garage at the grade level. The other way of addressing this is 3 stories total without garages, but having the garages underground. And so the concept here was have a large underground parking under this area, large underground parking here, large underground parking on the third type, but have them interconnected. That provides greater density with a very large amount of open space, 62% of the site in open space, because this central area here is not drive or parking, it's open space. And that's driven more likely to be single floor, single unit type buildings. So a shared access point in the middle. So rather than having 2-story units or stairways internally, you're having single level units. The larger building here being 3 stories and 56 larger units going up to 1,500 square foot. Let me go backwards. These units, which have these buildings, which have 8 units in them, would be much larger than the units that we were showing you earlier at 1,000 square foot per unit. These are 2,250 square foot, so much closer to what might be considered a luxury size unit. And then this building, being 3 stories, would have 1,500 square foot units, still larger than the minimum 1,000, but not quite as big. Total on the site, 152 dwelling units, so there's your 15 dwelling units to the acre. The big difference there is in order to work this at that density and have this much open space, that means having luxury units that are able to afford the underground parking. We talked about last time, and I'm sure the audience may not be aware of the difference in the cost of what underground parking does, but if a surface parking space costs somewhere between $8,000 and $10,000 per An underground space is closer to $28,000 to $30,000 per parking space. That drives the cost of a building up, as well as the need for elevators in these kinds of buildings as well. And the last of these alternatives, concepts, is townhomes across the entire site. And so these are all attached single-family units, but in a sort of row style in which they are adjacent two-story townhomes over two-car garages. These are larger units. These are 3,000 square foot units. But we don't quite make the open space. So I guess if we're going to tie ourselves to that 30%, we'd end up eliminating some of these units, a few. Now the density at that point is going to be closer to 10 dwelling units to the acre.
And parking is in the back.
Parking is
Accommodation.
accessed from behind, but it's garage units. It's not below grade. You still get open space and the periphery and the maintenance of the tree and the space around it. So I hope that is giving you a sense.
This would be similar to the style of the landmark condos in Northfield.
I believe so.
And it's sort of a lot like Regent's Row, only there's a little more breathing room in the central boulevard.
Well, I think that these are also larger collections of buildings. Regent Row is,
Yeah,
I
it's
think,
just
only
small.
eight or 10 units collected together. So this is much more of a street face. We've suggested you'd want to break up the front of these buildings with little offsets or significant offsets so that it doesn't look like Baltimore, in row units.
You're right.
But this creates some significant sort of traditional street frontages,
It's like walking through London.
very much,
Or Beacon Hill.
without the accents.
From a visioning standpoint, what has been sort of characterized as the vision? I mean, and I don't mean density or things like, is this the appropriate time to ask that, or maybe we should talk about that later? I don't know.
Well,
Chairman,
let
do you
me
think-
just weigh in with one thing. We're not trying to sell these units. We're not trying to suggest to you that you've got to pick amongst these concepts. What we were trying to do is put some exercises in density and layout before you, so you can say to yourself, does the parameter define what we're going to get? Does it restrict what we're going to get? Does it encourage something that we like? We're not trying to suggest these are the only types of layouts in any way, but there's enough difference here to say, how will the parameters affect what we will receive from the developer interest? If that means I haven't provided any vision, then I apologize.
No, I actually, I don't want to start the discussion on something that's not germane to his presentation, but just in seeing these different abstract diagrams from sort of a emotional standpoint, I'm trying to tap into that as much as I am from logistics and from number crunching. And the character of the community, to me, seems to be more important than maybe whether a developer can make it here or not. And I'm attracted to things that have a pedestrian fabric and integrate into the community and provide a sense of place over generations and more vertical living and so forth. And I'm just wondering if that is city council, or did the previous plan commission meetings have input on that? Or were we waiting to catch the ball from the developer?
Both.
Okay.
I could say is, we want to reconsider, and in other words, re-review the parameters that they had back in 2008. To first of all, decide and make a recommendation to the council, which of those should we keep, which of them should we delete, and which might we provide some flexibility on. And then number two, any other recommendation, advice, or counsel, that the city council can then decide what it wants to put into the request for proposal, or request for qualifications, however they proceed to do it, so that the community lays out to the proposers what we think in a broad sense, makes sense. So they aren't, so that the proposers aren't coming in suggesting things that are just completely out of bounds. Is that a fair characterization?
It is, and I might just add one thought, is that certainly you're supposed to look at the existing parameters, but if there are some concepts that come to mind, pedestrian scale or whatever that might be, it would not be inappropriate for you to recommend that parameters be added. I think the council wants to find that sweet spot between providing enough direction to a developer so that they have certainty coming in what the community's looking for, but yet allow the flexibility so that they can decide how to achieve it. And the city council very recently, and I think we talked about this before, reiterated that what is more important to them at this point is getting the right uses at the site, the right type of development, not for the short term of the community, but really looking for the long term. What's the right type of development on that site? And they're less concerned about the immediate size of the check that they're going to receive for that property.
So,
If I may, just make a remark, because I think it's important to clarify. The size of the check that we get for the property is almost irrelevant from my perspective, provided that we get the right development. What is not irrelevant is the ongoing legacy cost that we may create by approving a plan in a vacuum or a concept in a vacuum. In my humble opinion, this work has been done. We have recommendations from 2008 that are not markedly different than anything that we've talked about or contemplated or reviewed. And it is now time for a developer or series of developers to look at those earlier recommendations and make accommodations to those recommendations and weigh them against the economic realities of today's environment. And without a thorough economic understanding of where those proposals come in, I don't know how this body can recommend that we limit the scope and nature of the proposals that we receive. It makes no sense to me.
But we're not trying to limit them.
We are trying to limit them.
No, we're actually reconsidering some of these limitations to make it a little bit more flexible for potential developers.
They're not limitations as expressed, if I understand, and maybe I misunderstand. They're recommendations. They're simply the findings of a previous series of bodies that met and discussed these same things. And they provided frameworks in a vacuum in 2008, and we're about to do the same thing in 2013.
And I think that point gets to my question around the process, where we are in the process, because I tend to agree with Jeff, is that if a lot of this work has been done, let's take it to the private sector and let's get whatever interest we can and then bring forth real proposals before us to make the determination of what is viable.
With all due respect, I disagree. I'll take a specific example. Underground parking is required as part of the current condition. Why? Right.
Recommended as part of the...
Recommended, right, okay.
Right.
Now, I see no problem with reconsidering that in order to allow a potential developer to propose a plan that isn't constrained severely by the requirement that underground parking be a parameter.
But a developer, a worthy developer, is going to look at that requirement, and they're going to either propose something in accordance with that plan that is typically something we're going to reject out of hand if it doesn't work, whether it's pricing or ongoing legacy costs, or they're going to say, you guys are crazy, we can't do underground parking. But you leave it up to them.
Well,
not
that's
us.
what this
That's
allows.
through the RFP
That's what
process.
this process will allow them to do.
But
They won't even bid on it
would-
if the requirement going in is
I
underground parking.
disagree.
And maybe if I could just clarify process, the Property and Public Lands Subcommittee of the City Council is set up to do exactly what you're talking about. What they're saying, before they go out with an RFP, they just want to step back, because it has been a number of years. Are these still the right parameters? And that's what they've asked, that's what the Plan Commission or the City Council has directed the Plan Commission to do, and then the PP&L will do that work. They will vet, they will ask for some financial analysis, they will determine whether those parameters are viable. They will then try to identify a select number of developers who they can then have some very focused discussions with. So I think all of that is going to happen in the process. And maybe the sense of some of you is that these parameters are fine to go forward, and that
If we
would
went
be-
through, if we went through the submission of that prior recommending body, and that's all it is, a series of recommendations, that said, by the way, any deviation to these recommendations that makes sense is completely and entirely acceptable to us as far as a future review of your proposal. It just, we don't have to shackle anybody with this. We can't sit here and,
Well,
you know where I stand.
let me ask one more question, if I may.
And then,
And so then, based on what you just said, Kathy, is any plan, any approved developer who gets vetted, who comes up with a plan, are they gonna come before this body with a real plan at that point?
They will, but the Property and Public Lands Committee will have closely, they will have interviewed, they would have worked closely along with our consultant with that developer, so that by the time a plan gets to you, some of the financial vetting has been done. So again, the Plan Commission is doing its role and really looking at the land use pieces, the compatibility pieces, the community character pieces.
So, so the point is that's where a lot of the real work is getting done. And
Well,
so I guess I'm with,
If a
Jeff
developer
as to-
drives the streets, adjacent to this property and says, what I'd like to propose is a 25-story apartment tower, we're not going to approve it.
right,
Now, if, however, we say, these are the recommendations made in 2008, and you have 90 days to submit proposals in response to these recommendations, and make it very clear that you can make adjustments to the recommendations based on whatever you think is a defensible position. And we don't receive any proposals because they think that's too open-ended.
Then we know we have to
might need
change
to go
something.
do
Right.
this. But right now, we're gonna spend those same 90 days coming up with something in a vacuum that anybody worth their salt is gonna look at and say, I'm still gonna need to modify it in the following
no,
ways.
we will have come up with, let me back up. We've been tasked by the City Council to take a second look at these parameters and obtain public input in the process. On the 14th of August, we come up with the parameters. It may be, Jeff, that they're exactly the same, they may be slightly different, they could be radically changed, depending on what the public says, advice of our consultant, recommendations of staff. Those then will be taken by Public Property Committee, and then the council will decide where it's gonna go from here. I don't disagree with you as far as economic impact analysis. I don't know that that's a matter that will be our primary consideration. It may be secondary, but it isn't our primary.
It is to me as a taxpayer.
I understand that,
So.
and I understand that. Augie?
That's okay. Thanks, Mike. You know, I have a question maybe on a different scale than what we're talking about right now. And it might sound kind of funny, but the idea that I have is the parameters were drawn up in 2007, 2008, when municipal services moved to the west side and the city said, we have these 10 acres that we can do something with. I think over the period of years, even currently, parts of that site are still used by the city. Used for snow removal from downtown. There's some trees that get stockpiled there when they fall in the road until they can be chipped up. I have to think with diminishing property values, is there even a portion of the 10 acres that we should consider using as a satellite, as is being used now? Once it's sold, it's gone. And so I think step one might be, and maybe this has been done and I'm just not aware of it, has it been talked about that the city can use 1 acre, 2 acres? We're automatically assuming 10 acres is available. in kind of Jeff's analogy, only with a different set of numbers, if we get rid of it all, what's the city operating cost, because we no longer have that satellite opportunity? So I'm thinking even before it goes to a developer to say we have 10 acres, do we really have 10 acres? Does it make sense? Or is 8 acres more like it? And I know that's a whole different line of thinking, but something that I think, I just wanted to raise my hand because it's in the back of my mind.
And on that point, I think that's a good, I'm glad you raise it, because that's something that I think Kathy ought to take back to city manager, public lands committee, or whomever, to raise that question in the interim between now and the 14th.
And that certainly is something that's been discussed quite often. I actually think it's part of your discussion. As you look at the parameters, right now the parameters don't identify any portion of the site. Certainly there are some members of city staff who would say, gosh, if you can save us part of that property, do that. But how does it work with the surrounding developments that exist? How would it work with new development? How would it impact the site? But I think that's a very appropriate discussion for the commission to have.
Well, as we get to our discussion after public testimony, I think Augie, if you want to suggest that, feel free to offer that as something we should try to get feedback on in the ensuing 30 days or so. Okay. Lee, did you have more?
I do. Let me at least touch on one thing that you've just spoken about, and that I would say amongst the 6 of you, I'm not sure that you would agree that there is a conclusive statement that you can or cannot exceed any of these parameters. And think of it from the developer's perspective. They may choose to weigh in and propose something that exceeds or doesn't meet the standards, or they may not. This is a particularly delicate market condition. It's emerging out of essentially a crisis mode and trying to find its legs. I'm not trying to excuse what the developers will or won't do, but they will seek as much certainty in this process as they can. And it may be better for them and for the community to be specific about the things that you will not or cannot modify or respond to versus those that are guidelines. I think that they were written, I can't tell you what the intent at the time, but when I read them, they seem stronger than guidelines. And if the result of your discussions are, there are some of these that can remain as guidelines, and we will see the developer present to us the best site plan, the best land use, the best mix, and we will respond in kind, that's fine. That might be advancing the ball. But if they are presented as part of an RFQ or RFP as these are the parameters, they will be treated that way. There may be some who venture beyond them. Now, let's get at least through the last of these and describe that street access designated in a manner that integrates with the surrounding neighborhoods. Designed, not designated, designed. Access for multifamily uses and for any small-scale retail or service businesses be limited to Western Avenue. So if there is multifamily, or if there is small-scale retail or service, access can only be provided from Western Avenue. It cannot be provided from Laurel. It cannot be provided from Franklin. Those are the parameters. Is that a guideline? Is that a standard? Consistent with the grid-based street pattern of the central business district. Sufficient emergency ingress and egress. Well, that one's hard to argue with. Street connection to Franklin Place only to the single-family portion of the development and should not provide a through connection to Western Avenue. And I have violated that in several, if not most, of the layouts for you to look at. Consideration should be given to the benefits of widening a portion of Franklin Place and providing additional on-street parking for the benefit of the existing residential development to the north. And I can go back and show you that we did think that Franklin could be a much more attractive street layout with street trees and parking along it to support those areas, not just to the north, but to the site itself. Adequate on-site parking, can't argue with that. Underground parking to be provided in the new development to maximize open space. It appeared to me to say it will be underground. And one of the things that, without jumping the gun, I think one should consider whether covered parking as opposed to underground parking may be a better definition. Provide additional public parking on Western and Laurel Avenues. On-street parking ending no further west than the existing commercial development on the south side of Laurel Avenue. So put more on-street parking on Laurel, but don't take it further west than the edge of where the commercial already exists on the south side. Preserve the great oak tree south of the Municipal Services Building. Preserve some or all of Franklin Park and some or all of the berm and mature trees along Franklin Place. And then finally, minimize setbacks, set or establish minimum setbacks for existing zoning districts. So be consistent with the underlying zoning is what it says in terms of setbacks. So there you go. You have a series of parameters, and I'll leave it to you to determine whether or not they are guidelines or standards. But if you can, please be specific.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.
I'll stand here till you tell me to sit down.
Pardon me?
I will stand here until you tell me to sit down.
Further question? Yeah, I think we should move to public testimony. There seems to be quite a few people here this evening. For those of you who would wish to testify, could you just raise your hand? Okay, could you please stand up? I want to swear you in, please, if I may. Do you solemnly declare and affirm that the testimony you are about to give or have previously given is true and correct to the best of your knowledge? Thank you very much. Okay, whoever would like to go first, please do so.
Good evening. My name is Jan Gibson, and I live at 59 East Franklin Place, which is a home west of the Public Works area. It's a single-family home. I just wanted to add something before I start, that many of us, I included, we were very happy with the Public Works as a neighbor. They were quiet. They were quiet on weekends. We knew they were working all day during the week and through emergencies. And so I'm all in favor of preserving some of that for Public Works. Not everybody would agree with me, however. I asked Margie Hart as she left. She was going to hang around, and I asked her, she lives on Green Bay Road, and I asked her if she wanted to say anything. And she said yes. She was asking the question, how many vacant condos are there in the city, and also how many vacant retail offices in the city, in terms of determining what you're going to do with this property. I'm part of the neighborhood, actually, who, as I said, live near the property, and what we consider the greater neighborhood, which is a large group, probably more than 300 people, at least who were active, concerned interest group in 2007, because we saw the Laurel Avenue Development Committee, the one who recommended this, chaired by Tom Warsh, make recommendations about the property that we didn't think fit the betterment of the community. At that time, as I said, we had more than 300 active people who really took part and either wrote letters or gave concerns. These are taxpayers who are part of the Laurel Western Neighbors group who live along Green Bay Road up to the north, down to Deerpath, over to Hawkweed on Laurel, and then basically all east of the tracks as well. So this has really never been a small neighborhood issue. We think this affects a large number of homeowners. Primarily, we think it's a density issue and a traffic issue. We set parameters on our own, which we think you should be aware of, and some of them were accepted by the Laurel Avenue Redevelopment Committee, and some weren't. We feel that we wanted lower density of the development because of the traffic around the area. It gets pretty dense. And this area, we think, is probably the most dense in Lake Forest. I'm not sure, but it seems to be with the condos in Crystal Point, all up and down Western Avenue, and then also along Laurel. The height of the buildings, we felt, should not exceed those of Crystal Point. In other words, to keep the density down in some way. Residential development only. We obviously wanted residents because we have single-family houses on Burr Oak and Thomas Place, and also on Franklin, and also west on Laurel. We didn't want retail or offices in that area, in that development, even on the southeast corner. And the mixed use, we agreed with the mixed use of single-family homes, townhouses, and condos. I was not happy seeing all the entrances along Franklin and also Laurel. We actually wanted both entrances on Western because that was more public. Franklin Place is quite narrow. We like it the way it is. We have lovely trees, and actually we call that the Frank Farwell berm because he was mayor at the time putting that berm in, and also the pocket park. We wanted to see 50% green space. Crystal Point, by the way, has 62% green space. We wanted a minimum of 40-foot setbacks, and we wanted one developer. We wanted the oak tree on the 1 acre. It was exempt from development, and we thought it should continue to be exempt. And the pocket park we wanted to have remain, as well as the Frank Farwell berm. So those were the minimum criteria that we felt were reasonable. And in addition, once the parameters are set, we would like sensitive structures compatible with those in the area. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gibson.
My name is Stephen Barone. I live at 1261 Burr Oak Road. And I'm not going to repeat all of the comments that Jan made, but I guess I'd like to make a couple of observations. One is, I think initially, the group of people that were concerned during the 2007 and 8 planning for this development were, for the most part, fairly unhappy with the results of that recommendation. And I think that if what I heard you say as a group is true, that the check we receive for that property is irrelevant, then I think we can set some general guidelines, as in either single-family or multi-family development at a certain percentage, green space, as Jan mentioned earlier, parameters like that. I think we can set some restrictions, no commercial development on the property, minimum setbacks. The gentleman here talked about density being as much a factor of how it's presented as the actual number. And that's true. If you have the right setbacks, if you have the right landscaping, if you have the right green space, then the density, one density may be higher than another, but it may look different. So those are all critical factors, and I think you can't see that until a developer actually responds. Regarding the current parameters, I believe, and I could be mistaken, that these parameters were let out for an RFQ or an RFP after they were developed. And either the responses the city received were all considered unsatisfactory, or nobody responded. I'm not sure which it is. Kathy would probably know. So the parameters that were developed at that time probably weren't all that satisfactory, both for the city as well as for the developers. But I think the thing we really have to consider is the characteristic of the development and how it fits into Lake Forest. We can't simply say that just because you have 10 or 15 or 20 single-family homes, the legacy costs are going to be higher because you could have a lot of kids going to school. Because if that's the case, then we'll never have another development without multifamily buildings or commercial. So I don't think we should eliminate any particular kind of development just because the longer-term costs may not be as low as they would be if we had higher density and things of that nature. So I would like to see the commission look at some of these parameters, eliminate some of them, and make modifications to them. They were only recommendations, and I think they can be changed and should be. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name's Bruce Reed. I live at 612 Spruce Avenue. That's alongside the graveyard. The municipality owns the land, and that's different than a lot of things that come before the Plan Commission. And so the first point I wanted to make is, if this was a liquor store and we owned the liquor store on the land, we wouldn't sell the adjacent piece of land and allow it to be used as a liquor store. Lake Forest is comprised mostly of single-family homes, for which presently there's not much of a demand compared to what there might have been in 2007, 2008. So I'm wondering if it isn't perhaps part of what you do to decide if you want to strongly encourage rental product, which wouldn't be competitive to the existing housing stock. The other reason for that is not a temporary market consideration. It's perhaps driven by a long-term demographic. 2 years ago was the number one year for 18-year-olds in America. So for the next 16 years, the number of children coming up is a declining number. And that's what normally drives demand for single-family homes. Another factor that drives the demand for single-family homes, unfortunately, I think, for the city of Chicago, has been that their schools aren't perceived to be terribly good, and people come to the suburbs, the North Shore suburbs and the western suburbs. Chicago schools in certain areas are improving. Lincoln Square is an example, and people live there today who would have been natural candidates to come and buy houses in Lake Forest or in Wilmette or Winnetka or other suburbs. So there's a demographic argument for being careful about providing housing stock that competes with what's already here, aside from the local market conditions, which might be simply temporary. There's also been a big shift since 2008 in terms of where job creation occurs. Since 2008, I think I'm right in saying this, 48% of all jobs in the United States have been created in Texas. That's a right-to-work state. Personal income tax is negligible. In fact, I think it's zero. And it doesn't have a state budget problem. So there's some reason to believe that the in-migration to Illinois is going to be different in years to come as other states compete more effectively, and that'll affect the demand for single-family housing. The other side of the demographic argument is people are getting older, and there aren't a lot of options for people to go to in housing in the areas of the northern suburbs that they can rent. Sorry to keep beating the drum about rental stock. The impact of new residents has been extensively studied, and I think the study that's best known here is the one that was done by Clarion, funded by Open Lands, and I think not surprisingly that tended to find that new development imposes a burden on a community. There's two studies out of Texas, I think University of Texas, funded by the Texas Home Builders Association. Not surprisingly, that found that building new homes is really good for the economy. And then there's a third study that kind of says that the impacts are really much more subtle than that, and it depends on the age of the infrastructure and the capacity of the infrastructure, because you don't develop it one classroom at a time, you develop it. So it depends on how much of the capacity you've used. But my personal opinion is that those studies miss the bigger point. If you allow delivery of a housing type that is an oversupply, that by definition will lower the price of that housing type. And by extension, that lowering of price is available for extrapolation on tax appeal to the entire inventory, lowering the collection of taxes. So it's not simply that some developer will lose money or some houses in the immediate area will suffer a price decline. Those prices can be extrapolated, resulting in a lowering of tax. So to the extent you are considering economics, I'd invite you to consider whether you think that's a valid point, to look at what the impact is of allowing delivery of the wrong product type. The number of units, I think, is very important, and Lee and his firm are fellow Evanstonians. That's where our firm is. And there's plenty of examples of density in Evanston that's been well accomplished. But one of the things I would suggest you might want to keep in mind is that the best financed, most capable developers of multifamily product tend not to be drawn to projects where they feel there will be an opportunity to do less than 200 units. The 200 has to do with the efficiencies of managing the finished building. It has to do with the availability to sell that to a long-term holder like an insurance company who view investments of under 200 units at a time as being not worth the transactional effort.
Could you complete your remarks, please?
And the third point I wanted to make is that since you own this property, if you were to consider, and it might fit the definitions of a blighted area and it might be eligible to be a tax increment financing district, then you would have many more levers and controls available to you, particularly if you then combine that with a land leased structure for at least part of the property, so that you would have both the TIF and the ongoing contractual rights that extend well beyond the time of sale. So thanks very much, folks.
Thank you for your testimony. Is there anyone else who's the public who's changed their mind and wishes to testify that didn't stand up before? Okay, thank you. Okay, we've had the discussion about densities, we've had the public comment. Again, we're not going to discuss or make any final determinations this evening on these parameters, but we were given the matrix. And I'm wondering whether or not we might consider using it as a discussion point, whether we want to consider some or all of these, discuss them at a fairly high level, or what's the pleasure of the commission. One of the things that really struck me about this matrix is that it took a lot of the initial parameters or recommendations and kept a lot of them in the retained column. A few of them were suggested for deletion, but however, there's probably the vast majority of them were shifted that we ought to review and reconsider them. So I would just ask, and maybe we could have some general discussion about whether or not that kind of, for facilitating this commission at our next meeting, for coming to grips with and making some fairly definitive guideline and recommendation type decisions, whether this suffices for that kind of discussion, and does the commission want to get into some of these tonight, or I think we should in a fairly high-level sort of a way, at least to give staff some guidance and assistance in terms of what to come back with us.
I was going to offer, if you want to just have that high-level conversation, staff will work with our consultant and try and take what we heard in the public comments and take your comments and bring you back a set of recommendations for change or not change, depending on your
Right.
comments.
Okay?
I actually went through the matrix, and in those areas that you've just cited for reconsidering, I was actually willing to reconsider the majority of them. And
In the reconsideration column?
yes, I was. I had a couple of thoughts about density in terms of, whether we want to unleash density as something they can entertain, but on most of the other ones, I was willing to reconsider them.
My question would be, in what perspective would you reconsider? I'm making them more constraining on the development or expanding upon them?
Well, the recommendation, the reason here for reconsidering them was given, and I'll just say for the second one in our matrix, and the third one as well, those were basically parameters that limited what side of the site had to be what type of use. And the reason for reconsidering them was given that allow a good land plan to drive siting of the unit types. And I think that that's reasonably fair. I think that I'm getting a handle on, I think, what the trajectory of this is that we want to not inadvertently steer a good designer and developer away from coming up with something intuitive and inventive. And I think that's a good idea. So I'm in favor of doing
Yeah,
that.
see, I read through those, and I don't know what a good land plan means. I would expect that a developer would come in with a good land plan, and I, going through the matrix, going through the studies, reading through the requirements, I just don't, I think commercial viability would dictate where they come back to us, again, to that point. Or the alternative, I would request other information is what I would do at this point from the city and the consultant, who's done a very thorough job, by the way, thank you. But understand where we need more information to make a determination on a recommendation or not, is what my perspective would be. So for example, what would be, I think one of the public testimony was around, how many residences are vacant. Now, some of that, we can't get that information in that period of time, but we know the vacancy rate of the retail in town. We know the turnover rates. How is there a viability for retail at all? But then again, is it our role at this point to tell a developer that they can or cannot, work with retail on Western Avenue?
Well-
And so that's part of my,
Jim, we've got a suggestion here that commercial and office, that those restrictions be deleted from the guidelines.
no, I understand that.
And so the question
I understand
is,
that. My point is, at least from my perspective, those issues should be driven. If you were to ask me overall, going back to 2008, I'd say lower heights, increased green space and less density. Okay, that's what I would tell you. But I don't necessarily have an opposition to retail on Western Avenue. So, given the fact that this has been vetted through the whole process already, my perspective would be running it through a process of an RFP. It may have occurred years ago when the economy was bad and there was no viability at that point. The economy has changed now, and
How do you respond to Guy's point that the parameters as they are right now may be discouraging to a potential developer to
Well,
even consider a project?
how are we to amend them unless we know?
Well, what you could do is delete them all. Is that what you're proposing?
No, I'm not proposing changing them. I'm proposing we go out as a city, as an owner, as a taxpayer, we go out to RFP and see what developers, what ideas they have. And then if they request variances to those, then that would dictate as to, and come before this committee. And at that point, we can define in a concrete fashion.
I think the
as to
concern is
what-
that these parameters are already in place and they
But
may
we
be
don't-
con- and they
we
may
don't
be
know.
considered restrictive.
well, let me,
No,
let me-
getting back to your point about underground parking underneath the facilities, I think that's a reasonable request of a developer. Maybe they think it is, maybe they don't, but we don't know.
All right, well, you do have an
Talking in a
opinion on it.
but we're talking in a vacuum here, though.
I think, as I read this, and see if the rest of my colleagues agree, if we take, the bulk of these were put from a requirement into more flexibility, and that is to reconsider. And I guess the question is, are there any of these X's in the matrix? Did any of them jump out at you and you say, no, something that's in one column ought to really be in another column? Did any of you have that reaction to this?
I had two.
Could we have that discussion briefly? Go ahead.
First, I'd just like to say that I agree with Guy's approach, and I also believe that most of the items that are in the reconsider column would be okay for me to reconsider, as suggested here. The two that jumped out to me that I didn't particularly like was residential units above any non-residential use. That was reconsider. I actually like retaining that. I think this should be primarily a residential development. And secondly, maximum of 3 stories in height. I might consider one more, but I'd still like to see a limitation on that. And I think that would be in
Well,
keeping with the character of the.
As we go
of the
through
neighborhood.
these, we could say,
So those are the two.
This, okay,
I just answered your question.
okay. Augie?
The two that jumped out at me that, you know, just talking again at a high level is the commercial and the retail. You know, I really don't think that neighborhood, that corner, the lack of parking that exists out in the street as it is now will really support commercial or retail. And so when it went from no commercial or, you know, possible commercial to delete that and now make it open to commercial and office space, that jumped out at me as, no, I really think we ought to keep that as no commercial, no office. You know, all the developments we looked at, the 12, none of them had retail, none of them had commercial unless I missed it.
You're right.
And I really think it's a residential neighborhood. And I know there's a connecting link to the north.
I would
you know,
agree with him as well.
On Western. But at the same time, I think a business would struggle in that location. I think the ones to the north seem to have a fairly decent occupancy rate, but just due to the parking, the character of that neighborhood, and I really don't see the need to try to connect downtown with north of Crystal Point. I think that's kind of a stretch to try to make that happen. So I would leave it as no commercial, no office space.
Okay.
And just strictly make this, let's look at it in a residential basis.
Those are in the delete column, and there's only two, and I didn't really have an issue with trying to alter that. I mean,
Okay.
from what was
It is a
recommended
delete, so-
previously.
So, under what Augie is saying, though, those would go from the delete column to retain. You're saying you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay.
And if we retain them, it says no standalone commercial, no office uses.
And-
I'd like to retain that.
And I agree with him as
All
well.
right. Jim and Jeff, any of these that you think we ought to
Well, I
change?
would just start right there, and I would say that I would not want to change the recommendation that we delete the no standalone commercial. I think that a properly integrated mixed-use plan that takes into consideration the concerns of the residential character of the north and western portion of that parcel makes potentially all the sense in the world. It's a 10-acre parcel, guys. You know, we don't need Franklin parking to accommodate commercial on a 10-acre parcel. So there could be, you know, a freestanding grocer. There could be, you know, some sort of a significant retail component that could be integrated into residential above and open space around, and it could work absolutely, you know, as well or better than putting additional residential units on a site to compete with existing residential units. That's what the economic suggestions of a qualified developer are gonna
So
tell us.
you believe, you don't agree with the position that we should delete the commercial and office?
No, I don't. I
Okay,
think
that's what
it could
I'm
be
trying
a
to get a
viable
sense.
part
Jim?
of a proposal,
Yeah.
properly structured.
Right, and that gets to my point where if we go through the process and sound credible developers come in and say they need that to make it viable, or they believe it will be viable, then I believe they should have the ability to do that, or at least come before us to determine that. And to the point about other retailers suffering, some do, but part of the reason they're suffering is because the rents are very high, and if you were to offer some level of alternative for dental offices or something, that may force the other retail costs down, and you'd have more existing. I'm just speculating. I'm happy with the standards, and if we're going to look at revamping, I would possibly look at a variety of other things to revamp, such as no entry off of Laurel or Franklin and everything off of Western. If we were going, you know, down a certain road and not limited to the matrix.
Okay.
So, but again, a lot of that you find out in the process, the standard, at least in my opinion, having done zoning work before, you find out through the standard zoning process where a developer comes in and they would ask for a variance around certain elements of this, or they would propose a plan and we would say, no, we think it should be this. And we drive it based on their idea holistically that maybe access only off Western would be the most viable, but maybe they would get something in return, maybe an additional level, a floor or something like that. And that's my point around going through this exercise at this point. I think we're speculating on plans that we already have in place, and without the commercial demand or the commercial knowledge and expertise, it's pure speculation. So that's my position. Learning more information about it is fine, but until we have real-life people willing to buy the property and develop it, we're speculating now, and I think that work has already been done.
You want the developer to have its creative options left open.
Well, and let the market decide, frankly. And then we, with a concrete plan in front of us, can make that determination. So that's really my point here.
How would you suggest we achieve that, and given the parameters that are in place?
What's the zoning? Ken?
Seriously.
Let's not assume that the existing parameters are in place, because we have the opportunity and expectation by the city
Then
council.
let me rephrase the question.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Either the parameters that are in place or revised set of parameters. I mean, I think we're charged with trying to create and foster the environment you're talking about.
Sure.
So how would you do it?
Well, I would do one of two.
Hearing so far.
Well, I would do one of two things. I heard from some of the public here that they were unhappy with the work that was done in the past. So I would either open that up completely and reevaluate from the ground up and do some of the work that Jeff has talked about and revisit all that, or I would have the trust of, that the determination of the prior commissions and the prior work was accurate and appropriate, and follow through on that, and then go through an RFP process and see if there's any viable interest in the marketplace today. The marketplace has changed since 2008, 2007-8, both in the positive and in the negative direction, depending on what type of property we're talking about, and go and see if there's commercial viability. If it proves not to be, but there are some leading developers who come about that say, yes, this is what we can do.
Wouldn't you
We
agree?
visit those issues then. So I would go one or two. I think frankly, we're doing a lot of work that's been done before, and until we either really do it well, I don't feel comfortable speculating the way where we've been here
I
without
understand what
public
you're saying.
hearings on a regular
I'm
basis.
just asking you, if we leave it the way it is restrictive.
Very restrictive.
So why don't we?
It should be. This is Lake Forest, and that's why we're here.
Well,
I want to
you want-
protect, I want to protect.
I guess,
Will we invite
Well, let me-
proposals or not?
here's what
I would.
Let me suggest this.
I would at this point.
The city councilor basically decided that the 2008 parameters were too restrictive. And what we see in this, in my opinion, is our consultant and staff saying, we really should do what I think I heard you guys saying. We should open it up and be more flexible to see what we get. Okay?
And invite
And
proposals.
invite proposals. So, I mean, to me, that says that we basically, next time, these that are in the reconsider column, we basically decide, should they be guidelines? Should they be nice to have? What should they be? So that we do allow as great a flexibility as we can, to get away from the restrictions that were before. On the other hand, if we think that some ought to be deleted, as we had discussion tonight, let's take those up next time and decide whether we delete them or keep them. And then, do we really feel sure about those that are in the retain? Some of us may feel, let's take some of those in the retain column and put them over into the guideline. Let me call it guideline. Anything that's in a reconsider would be considered a guideline, a nice to have. Would that give staff and the consultants some guidance? Along with, of course, all of the public testimony that we had this evening.
Well, and I think that's key, but even a more robust public involvement would make me feel more comfortable if we are going to revisit these.
And I
That's
think-
my position on
I
that.
think we'll get that more public involvement once the staff work comes back for our next meeting. It'll be out, it'll be public. The public will have an opportunity to come to our next meeting and give us their best shot and advice and counsel as to what we should do.
I will note that the meeting was published in the agenda in the normal ways, but from the previous discussion on this, we had an interested parties list of just over 350 people. So we did mail direct notices of this meeting to that full list. Some of the envelopes came back, but, so we did try and reach out to all those people that were engaged in the process before, and we will continue to do that. And I would just add, if anyone is left in the audience who didn't receive a mailing directly, please sign up back there and we'll make sure you do.
Mr. Chairman, here's my thought. I think you're on the right track, and I think in Commissioner Culbertson's defense, clarifying some of the stuff is going to be a benefit to us and certainly our consultant's recommendation. But I think it really boils down to, we have a retain and a delete column, period, to address. Everything else is subject to reconsideration pending a proposal that we receive and evaluate, correct? With the exception of things that we feel so strongly about that any developer receiving an RFP should know, don't go there. That's really what this is all about. So, rather than have 80% in the retain column, let's make sure 90% are in the reconsider column, and we have one or two either retains or deletes. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to provide those recommendations to the chairman, so that we can discuss them in some sort of organized way during the next meeting.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And get them, if you could submit them by, what's 10 days from now?
I would ask 2 weeks from today.
Yeah, that you get them to Kathy and to me. And then we will get them into, it'll be a staff recommendation, but then we can decide how we label things and get it out to people ahead of the meeting to, because I frankly have, based on the public testimony, I've gotten some additional new insights that I didn't have, but that when combined with what I saw on the tour of the 8 surrounding community parcels, I think I've got a fairly good idea as to what I'd like to see on that property, and it's I don't believe it's 13 units per acre.
Is it more?
I don't
Is
know
it
what
more?
it is.
In fairness to
Yeah.
the two gentlemen
Yep.
at that end, I'd like to
Thank
see
you.
the creative input. I'd
Yeah,
love to see it. I'd love to see imaginative proposals for the property. I don't want to
From
restrict.
developers.
Yeah, from developers. I don't want to restrict them. I want to open it up.
I think the compromise is a fair compromise. I think that you're suggesting the compromise is a fair compromise.
Okay.
To go through, narrow it down for really critical public discussion on those that we're going to change from currently. But I would also like to reserve the right to add other items as well.
You got it. That makes sense.
That I feel strongly about that may not have been addressed.
And something else too, is that we're kind of focusing in on this matrix.
That was
And-
my point, right?
And the idea that we are going to be taking things out of a retain into a reconsider into a delete, and I know we have to structure this somehow, and this is great because you've generated tremendous conversation. We're pretty animated about this petition. We don't even have a petitioner. But which is great, because the worst thing is to have someone come in with a plan and, it's his way or the highway, and then we try, well, can you do this, and can you move that garbage can over? So it's better to do it this way. And I guess maybe, listening to y'all talk is giving me a chance, maybe what we should do or consider doing is not just work with the matrix, but have a prioritization of some of these items where we say, there are all these things here, but in particular, and I know I'm speaking for myself, I happen to gravitate towards this, and you guys may disagree, but I was particularly attracted to I like the Beacon Hill terminology that you used on the one streetscapes. I just thought it was a very interesting way to kind of really integrate that grid and so forth. And we have a category here called pedestrian-friendly streetscapes, connections for new/existing residents. And maybe a developer, if he hears us say that we place high priority on certain of these parameters, he will tell his designers, hey, these guys really want us to hit on this. This is going to be well-received. And maybe we can't max the development out with density, but can we make some money if we just build some of these things? And that's what we do. That's what they really want to see done here. I mean, that might be something we have discussion about, you know. That's the quality of the development particularly. Because, you know, right now we're talking about abstract items, and that gets really dangerous. Because what one guy, I mean, with a few exceptions in percentage of green space, et cetera, in a few of the punched openings to Franklin, everything you showed us kind of meets this. So that's I'm not a big government control guy at all, but at the same time, I think that if you throw it out there, you're gonna get somebody's interpretation of it is gonna be so vastly different than another guy's interpretation that I'm not completely trusting of they'll bring us the best solution thing. I think we have to help them. Developers are like everybody else. They don't know everything. I don't think that they always know the best land plan, the best quality. So if we can maybe even recommend some of these as that we think are more important than the other parameters in terms of quality, I think that might be better direction than we could give them by moving things in and out of a column.
Lee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I like the idea of setting priorities. I think if you look at these parameters as being text that is likely to be in the RFQ, in the RFP, and that they will be read by a developer, the guidance that you can provide in the form of not, if I would make a suggestion, it would be to change the terms of the column in addition to setting priorities. And the terms might be for require, encourage, and prevent or prohibit. But essentially giving the direction that says there are things that we think are musts. There are things that should be or we encourage but will consider. And there are things that we would essentially say that's just not right for this site. But I like the added dimension, if you will, of saying, but the top priority for us is, and whether that's access or open space or whatever you think is critical. But if you would, it would help us to understand and better write that RFP ultimately, to be able to stipulate what is strongly a direction that you think you must take and is unlikely to be wavered from, so that the developer understands that and makes a decision to stay or come. And those things that you think are important to the community, but if a great design says something else, that you will at least consider it.
So just to summarize,
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, you've asked the members of the commission, and we'll certainly talk with Commissioner Anderson to visit some more sites. We'll actually get you an updated list of developments. Commissioner Berg gave us a couple more, and as did the chairman, so we'll add that. We'll add the densities provided by TESCA. And then by the end of the day, 2 weeks from today,
It's the 31st.
21st,
31st.
31st, I'm sorry. Email to the chairman and copy me your thoughts, and I will forward those to Lee, and we'll have him work on developing this.
Thoughts on the points in the matrix, is that?
Pardon me?
Thoughts on the points in the matrix.
Or other issues.
Or
Yeah.
just
Or
just
other
thoughts in
issues, I mean,
general.
bringing up a surplus, retaining surplus land, or.
Right.
Can I ask a favor? The matrix is constructed in like a Word or an Excel format, correct? Can it be emailed to each of us?
Sure.
In that way? That way we can,
Sure.
might
Or
make it a little more
if,
presentable when we
if
get
the
that.
matrix is troubling, we can just send you the parameters and you can play with them. You want the matrix?
Matrix
Okay.
is great.
Yeah, that way
Okay.
we can
Okay.
add our.
And just a reminder, please remember to avoid violating Open Meetings Act. You can't email, your email should just go to the chairman and with a copy to me, and then we'll get the information out to everyone.
I would like to suggest, rather than the 31st, the 29th. That's 2 days earlier to give, a couple more days to staff and the consultant to take this and wrap it into some things. So let's get them in by the 29th, please.
It's a Monday.
It's a Monday.
And we'll send out a
Any time in the
reminder and,
weekend work.
in the document in Word.
You know, there was one more thing that I was gonna bring up. I didn't know if it was good to bring up. And actually, Mr. Reed brought it up. And it was the idea of rental, of some component of rental. And I was wondering, you know, as far as providing some type of housing that's a little more accessible for young people that have been maybe brought up in Lake Forest but can't afford to buy a home here right out of college, but maybe could rent, or maybe older people that don't want to own, or something like that. Is there any benefit to making rental kind of a consideration or a recommendation to a developer? I mean, as to how it might impact the city's
In your comments.
population?
Put that in their comments, if you feel.
And then you can all discuss it.
You will, I understand you will get us the concept A through F. You'll get those to us as well? Sending,
Please.
please, that was very helpful, to me at least, in terms
So
of.
long as you remember their concepts, they're not at all meant to
I
be
understand. Augie, did you?
proposals of any kind.
Yes, just to revisit the thought of, do we really have 10 acres to work with? And can that be a parallel activity as to what we're doing for whether it be Kathy to re-explore with, you know, different factions of the city, how much of that property is really in use, how much is needed? They've never been without it. And the thought of being without it, what does that really impact?
I'm
Do we-
just curious if that's within the mandate of our direction from the city council or not.
I
just
think it
asking the
is
question.
within your mandate to look at alternative land uses. What I can tell you is that we frequently have that discussion. There was a time when we weren't using that property when we first moved out there. As it sat empty, you're absolutely right. We see more things appearing over there. But it's less, it is an issue that city staff needs to deal with, but I think it is an issue, it's a land use question in front of you. It's not gonna come from staff that we need 2 acres. We've already been directed that this property is available for redevelopment. If you think in your land use discussion that some land use of that type would be appropriate, then it will be appropriate to include it in the parameters.
Well, I think my major question would be, how much does it cost operationally if we don't have it available to us? Snow removal in the middle of the night for Market Square, I know it's used for that. It's used for temporary parking with shuttle buses for different events.
Well, and that, our site out west was designed to accommodate everything. Staff has been given the challenge to look at other places, whether it's near West Campus, whether it's on the east side, to deal with snow storage or, so that challenge is already out there to look at other sites operationally, but we can certainly ask the question again.
It could run parallel with what we're doing, I think, you know.
So, I think that's a good suggestion. Okay, any other discussion, comments, whatever? Let's see, so I think we've covered item number 5 with sufficient extensiveness. Our next meeting is on August 14th. I would like confirmation from everybody in the next day or two that people are gonna be able to make that.
I'm there. Give it to you now.
You can do it?
Yes.
You can?
Yeah, I think I'm good.
On vacation.
Mean you're not available?
I'm not available.
Okay.
I am available, yes.
Okay, so I don't need to pull
We need to check with Commissioner Anderson and just round that out. Okay. Then any other business to be brought up? Augie, did you want to give us a report on the?
I'd be happy to. In regards to, I'm a member of the Hospital Advisory Committee that's working with the designers as well as 8 other Lake Forest residents to work within the parameters of the master plan for the hospital. We've had a total of 6 meetings so far. The 9 people that are the citizens that make up the group include 2 architects, 2 mechanical engineers, the president of Open Lands, landscape architect, former congresswoman, an administrator in the healthcare field and myself. And we are at the point of, in the design process that you would call schematic design. The site plan, we've had about 4 to 5 meetings on the site plan. It's developing very nicely, probably 90% of the way towards its completion. We saw building elevations for the first time yesterday, and building massing. The original plan was to come before the Plan Commission in September. I don't believe we're gonna make that. I think it's actually gonna be later in the fall if things go right, but there's still a lot of discussion going on. And just to give you an overall idea, last night's meeting went from 5 o'clock to 9 o'clock. And it's simply not asking the designer to stay in compliance with the master plan. The depth of discussion is much deeper than that. And again, it's not to be restrictive, but it's just to have a thorough understanding of what they're designing, what the ideas are behind their design. Very interesting. I will say, just to give you some idea, originally we were told that vertical transportation was better than horizontal transportation of patients. I think that shifting has changed a little bit. And so just to give you some idea, things are getting more horizontal than vertical. And so it's been interesting, and we continue to go at it once a month, and within the next few months, we'll probably see something.
And I just wanted to add that the construction to construct the right in, right out from Route 41 directly into the hospital campus will be started any day. We're waiting on a Army Corps permit that we expected, I don't know, probably 45 days ago now. So you will see that construction. The road will actually be constructed just south of the child care center on the hospital campus.
Can we ask a question? Are there any indications or any tendencies towards any variances from what the parameters we set forth a year and a half ago or so?
The master plan is being adhered to. Some interpretation is going to be required as to if the master plan is an absolute to say you must do this, or it's a permissible use to do this. So there is flexibility that's been going on. So to answer your question, they've been mindful of the master plan, but if there is a perceived variance from what the master plan indicates, it's with, I think, compelling good reason, at least in our opinion up to this point.
Okay.
That's great.
Any other matter to come before us? If not, a motion to adjourn would be in order.
So moved.
Second. All those in favor of adjournment say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. We are adjourned.
So they took that out now. Did you see that? I drove by. After I did all these tours, I decided to go look at the actual Laurel and Western site.
I did last night, I didn't notice.
And I went behind to